Welcome. If you have a Land Rover 1998 Discovery 1 LE, you may want to subscribe to my channel. In there, you'll find a lot of repairs that you can do yourself and save big money. I try to post at least once a week simple repairs that you can do yourself on your Land Rover. Just click above on the right hand corner and it'll take you there. And if you're new to my channel, I would like to take the time out to say welcome and hope to see you again and again. But before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell. Believe it or not, this helps me continue making these videos. Alright, so I was hearing some knocking noises in my engine, and using a stethoscope, I pinpointed the noise to my water pump. So I popped the serpentine belt off and started examining it. And you can see where the pulley that goes into the water pump is right here where the red arrow's at. Now I moved it front to back and you can see how loose it was. Now my water pump wasn't leaking, but it was making a noise, so I'm assuming it was coming from the bearings. They were going out. You can see how it wiggles here a little bit. So it looks like I'm replacing a water pump. So let's get to work. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to need to remove this plastic cover that's on top of your fan, right where the red arrow's at. You're going to have two clips, one here, and on the left side, a little lower, you have one here. Just unsnap those two clips. And go ahead and push upwards and you'll be able to remove this upper shroud. Just go ahead and set it aside. Now we're going to need a large wrench like this. It's a 36 millimeter. You can find these on a parts store or you can pick one up on eBay. We're going to place that wrench right here. Right where the red arrow's at. Once you have it in position, you're going to hold the wrench and you're going to hit it with your hammer counterclockwise, and it should unscrew. Once you have it loose, just unscrew it and remove the fan. Now what you're going to do is on this pulley here, you're going to take your ratchet and you're going to loosen these three nuts. They're 10 millimeters. Do this before you take off your serpentine belt. As you can see, I took off mine and that was a mistake. It's a lot easier to loosen these bolts with the serpentine belt on. Now the next thing we're going to look for is your drive belt tensioner. This is what the part looks like, and this is what the part looks like in a vehicle. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your 15 millimeter socket with a long ratchet and you're going to place it right here where this bolt's at, where the red arrow's at, and you're going to turn your ratchet clockwise. Okay, let's go in the engine and locate this part. Okay, if you look at your alternator, just slightly to the left below the alternator is your tensioner bolted into the engine. To the right, you'll see the pulley, and there's the nut that we're looking for. Now let's go ahead and put our 15 millimeter socket in it with our long ratchet. Now, if you don't have a long ratchet, I used a long pipe to give me a little more leverage. Once your socket's in there, just turn your ratchet clockwise and you'll see it relieve tension to the serpentine belt. Once you have it loose, go ahead and remove it from the alternator. Now remember, don't get your fingers in between the fan belt and a pulley. If that ratchet slips, you're going to get tension and you don't want your finger pinched between the pulley and your serpentine belt, so be careful. You can see here I already have the bottom fan belt removed from the bottom pulley. Now I'm removing it from the power steering pump, and with my left hand I'm pulling outwards to the left, and here's the top view as I'm pulling it out. You can see how easy the fan belt comes out. Now that you have your serpentine belt removed, you can go ahead and remove these 10 millimeter bolts. Once you remove the bolts, go ahead and take off the pulley and set it aside. Okay, as you can see, we're looking now into the water pump. So at this point, we want to put a pan underneath so we can collect the fluid as it comes out of the water pump. Otherwise, it'll get all over your driveway. So here's the new water pump, and right where the two arrows are at, you're going to loosen these two bolts first. You're going to use a 7/16 socket to remove these bolts. These two bolts, once you loosen them, your fluid is going to start to drain. So remove these two bolts first and let it sit for a while as it drains. As it's draining, you can go ahead and loosen up this hose clamp right where the red arrow's at. You're going to need to remove this hose so you can remove the water pump. Once all the fluid is drained, and once you loosen up the hose clamp, and once you removed all the 7/16 bolts that were screwed into your water pump, you can now remove the water pump. Once you have it removed, just set it aside. Now we're at the halfway point. It's downhill from here. As you can see, I have the new water pump on the left and the old one on the right. If you spin the new one, you can see how it wants to turn. But if you take the old one, it doesn't want to turn, and you can see how bad those bearings were. This is what the back side of the water pump looks like. Okay, now comes the fun part. So grab a beer, put some headsets on with your favorite music, and what you're going to do is you're going to scrape this old gasket off. Now I'm using a putty knife. I've done this ever since I was a kid, but be very careful when you use a putty knife. And whatever you do, do not scrape the aluminum and nick it. This could possibly cause a leak later, so keep it nice and flat. So when you're scraping, make sure you have a nice flat surface. Once you got most of it done, take some sandpaper and lightly sand it. Make sure you have a nice, good, clean surface like this. Okay, next we're going to get some Permatex, and we're going to apply it to the water pump as shown. Get some nice, good coverage on it. Make sure there are no voids. It's all covered. If you skip a spot, you potentially could have a leak. You can never put too much of this stuff on. Now we're going to apply our gasket. Just go ahead and stick it right on there. Okay, as you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm taking all the bolts, and what I'm doing is I'm putting an anti-seize lubricant on it. What this does is it helps the bolts from seizing up into the aluminum block. So the next time if you have to take it out, it'll be easy for these bolts to come out. Once that's done, we can go ahead and continue on putting Permatex on the gasket. You want to apply the same amount just like you did on the water pump. Again, you can never put too much of this stuff on. Once you got it all on there, we're ready to install the water pump. Okay, now we're about ready to install the water pump. But before we do anything, what we're going to do is we're going to exchange the hose clamp to a new hose clamp. This is a good habit to get into. Unless your car is brand new, you always want to change out the hose clamps. After a while, they get old and rusty. So that's what I'm doing right now, is just replacing the hose clamp with a new one. Once we have that done, we can go ahead and start to position the water pump, and we can start screwing it in. Remember, you have two long bolts, so make sure you're putting those in the correct holes. As you can see, I already pre-installed some of the bolts into the water pump. That way it's a little easier, just rather than grabbing bolts and putting them in. Just makes work a little more simpler. Next, you're going to take your 7/16 socket and you're going to tighten the bolts up. Don't get them too tight, just get them hand tight. Remember, these bolts are steel and they're going into an aluminum block, so you don't want to strip these, otherwise you're going to have a lot more work you're going to have to do. That's why you want to hand tighten them in the very beginning. Once you have all the bolts in, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to torque the bolts down just like you're putting a tire on. You're going to want to tighten them to 18 to 19 foot-pounds. I got this digital torque wrench at Harbor Freight for about 150 bucks. If you got a Land Rover, you're going to need one of these so you can correctly put the right torque on all your bolts. Okay, now that we got all our bolts torqued down, we can install our lower radiator hose that goes into the water pump. Here you can see I'm using a socket to tighten up the hose clamp. Next, we're going to install our pulley. We're going to go ahead and screw our 3 bolts in. Once you have that done, now we can go ahead and install our serpentine belt. Here's the pattern that you're going to use to install your serpentine belt. Okay, once you have the serpentine belt in, go ahead and remove this plastic protective cap. It's on here just in case you accidentally bump it and destroy the threads. But before we install the fan, what we want to do is put some oil, or I use some anti-seize lubricant in there. And as you can see, I gave it a little shot of WD-40. The other thing you want to do is on the front side of the fan, you want to clean it with, if it's dirty and it's got debris on it, clean it, especially where the spring area is at. This is sort of like a thermostat. Once it gets to a certain temperature, it kicks on your fan. So make sure that this thing is nice and clean. Now we can install your fan. Just drop it in and screw it right in. That's all you have to do. Now that you've properly screwed in your fan, fill your radiator fill tank with antifreeze. Don't forget to squeeze the hose to get all the air bubbles out. Make sure it's full. Make sure you don't have any tools laying around to fall in the engine once you start it. Go ahead and start it. And see if you have any leaks. Make sure you don't have any problems with your serpentine belt. Once everything looks good, go ahead and snap in your protective guard that's on top, and you're done. Now make sure to watch your fluid level to make sure that your system is full. Once your engine cycles, you'll probably need some more radiator fluid, so keep an eye on it for every day for the next week. And of course, check your driveway and make sure you don't have any leaks. And that's it. You're done. Well, if you replace the water pump costs less than $100, but you saved yourself anywhere from $500 to $1,000 to have this job done. Sooner or later, your water pump's going to go out. I say every Land Rover owner should know how to replace a water pump, and as you can see, it's not very hard. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it was very informative. Please check out my other how-to videos. Oh, and check out my new website. There's new items being put in there every day. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, hit the bell. Until then, we'll see you at my next video. Bye.